Hello. We will get started in just a minute or two while we wait for some more people to join us. For those of you who are already here, this is an office hours focused just on LSA. So the target audience or the focus audience is for people working on the LSA for their COC. So if you don't work on your LSA, this might not be the place for you. If there's other folks in your COC that help with the LSA that you think might be useful to have here, you can have them register and join at any point over the next hour. And maybe, Juliana, you could put in the chat the registration page link. I think it's a diff. So that's for the HMIS webinars. It's the other link for the LSA office hours. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is LSA Office Hours. I am joined by a host of people on the LSA team, many people you have seen before, either on meetings like this, webinars like this, or as your own review team. We also have Juliana helping us out today as a back-end team member. You might have talked to her as she fills in for some people while they're out. And then we have Kayla Thompson, who is helping us with all tech and WebEx-related issues. So if you are having any issues, you can send a chat to Kayla or send a chat to all panelists, and Kayla will get that and help troubleshoot any tech issues that you're having. Closed captioning is available. You can click on the closed captioning option at the bottom of your screen. If you have trouble with that, you can also ask Kayla. Kayla. For those of you that were here last LSA office hours and for the HMIS admin calls, it'll work basically the same. We've switched over to using the chat instead of the Q&A option here in WebEx. You are muted. It works a similar way as the Q&A in that the chat is open for us to put links into, and you are welcome to ask questions via the chat, but no one else will see your questions. We will provide answers to some questions via the chat, but we have a lot less content today, so we're also hoping to answer a lot of questions verbally. So we're going to get through our updates, then we're going to move to working our way through the questions in the chat. So it might take a little while, but we will see them and we will get to them. You are welcome to start asking questions at any point, and we will try and get those answered to you at some point. If there are some easy to answer questions, we might put those into the chat while people are presenting, but otherwise, don't worry if you don't see the answer to your question yet. And just one thing, if you use slide numbers or reference, if you're asking a question about a specific slide, it's helpful to use slide numbers or reference exactly what you had a question about. If you have a question about your own LSA, flags, et cetera, just being as specific as possible with your questions so we know how to give you the best answer. There are a lot of other resources. We already have, last week, we posted the slides and recording from our first LSA office hours. So those are on the HUD Exchange now. It has all of these links. We'll also be putting links in the chat as we go to different resources. But you are welcome. You can get those links now on HUD Exchange from the slides from the previous office hours. So our agenda, we'll talk about, actually, this is switched a little bit. We'll talk about HDX 2.0 updates, then the timeline, and then we'll talk a little bit about common issues and things to remember from what the questions we've been getting so far. And then we'll open it up to questions, and that'll be the bulk of today. So just a reminder that we have talked about a number of things related to the LSA and AHAR on previous HMIS lead webinars and our first LSA office hours. You are welcome to ask questions about the process and timeline and HDX, et cetera, but we are not going to spend a lot of time covering that in with slides and stuff at this presentation, just because we know a lot of people have already seen that information. But again, feel free to reach out with any questions in the chat as you have them. So starting with the HDX 2.0 updates, happy to answer any questions that folks have, particularly related to, there were a lot of updates that happened last week, and with those updates came a lot of things getting broken and then needing to be updated. So last week was a bit tumultuous, I would say, for everyone, for us as well, and things were happening very quickly. So in some ways it was great that things were getting fixed quickly, but then other things were getting broken. And so right now we, I think, are at a really great place in that almost everything got fixed and updated as of last Thursday evening, Eastern time. So the thing I will go into a little bit of what was resolved and what's still outstanding. But the thing I will say overall is that most people will need or want to re-upload starting today. If you haven't re-uploaded since, I think, 6:30 p.m. on Thursday night Eastern time, you'll want to re-upload because a lot of things were going on last week that resulted in not all of your flags being visible. And then some flag calculation issues that were identified were also pushed out and fixed. So there could be some, last week, if you uploaded last week, you could have seen some flags fall off accurately because we fixed the underlying flag calculation. And then there could be some flags you weren't seeing that should have been showing up for you that might reappear when you re-upload. So I'll go into a little bit more of that, but that is kind of the general feel of what happened last week. And then one other thing I will note, we've said this before, this team in this office hours is not the place to ask specific Stella P questions, but we did just want to note that we know that Stella P has been down for about approximately the last month, and it is up and running as of this morning. So there was about a 20-25 minute period from 8 a.m. to 8:30 Eastern time this morning where HDX 2.0 was down. You weren't able to upload or possibly log in. So if you tried to access the system during that brief window and had anything go wrong or you were already in the system, that would be the reason, and it was planned and intentional, and there was a banner about it. And we tried to pick a time that was the least impactful to the most communities, but we did see that a couple people were in there early this morning. So if you did see that, that's why. But the good news is that StellaP is up and running. Your LSA uploads should be televised, and any future LSA uploads should be televised. If you have any questions about that, you can direct that to the Stella P communication channels, but that's kind of a little bit related to LSA and some downtime and a big push on everyone. A lot of work went into that the last couple of weeks. So we're very excited that that's back up and running. And so I will talk a little bit about the LSA specific updates, and I'm going to share my screen and for 1 second. So for those of you that don't know, Weebly is our the kind of host website where we put HDX updates. You can, Juliana will put the direct link in the chat. You don't have to log into HDX 2.0 in order to access this URL. You can just go straight there, but it is also linked at the top of HDX 2.0 on the LSA page in the little banner. And this is the page that will have everything HDX, both interface and flag calculation related. So just to walk you through this, at the top are our current outstanding errors, warnings, interface issues, and then down here you'll see resolved errors and warnings. So you will be able to see, you will see they have the date they were posted and the date they were resolved. So like the red banner bug, you can see that we posted this on 12/7 and it was resolved at 6:27 p.m. Eastern time on 12/7. So some of these things we're really getting updated very quickly, and so you might not have even seen it in the outstanding issues, depending on when you were looking at this page. But we have put all of the resolved issues down here so you can take a look and see if that might have applied to you. Again, a lot of people were impacted by the red banner bug, getting red banners or not having all of their flags pushed through. And so that shouldn't be happening anymore. If you re-upload now, the number of COCs getting a red banner should be greatly reduced, but that doesn't mean that red banners won't be happening. So if you do get a red banner, you should still, if you upload today or anytime forward, you should still let your liaison know, and we will try and resolve the red banner issue. Primarily, red banners mean that not all of your flags are showing up. So you will see some flags and you can still work on the flags that you're seeing, but you will want to reach out to your liaison and ask us to help resolve the red banner issue to push all of the rest of your flags through so you can see all of them. You will note that a lot of other flag calculation issues were pushed through last week. So if you had any of these flags, it is likely that if you were to re-upload now, these would fall off of your flag list, and those are kind of the group of flags that would fall off accurately. And then missing flags, this you can read about it, but this is like what I was talking about. There was about a 24-hour period. Let's see, yeah. So from like 29-hour period from 12/5, 5:30 p.m. to 12/6, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, where not all, that's kind of related to this, not all flags were showing up. So we think that we have resolved both those kind of HDX issues as well as these flag calculation issues, and all of these will require you to re-upload your LSA export to HDX 2.0. So again, if you do that and you're still getting a red banner, reach out. And if you re-upload and think you're still getting flags that are miscalculating, whether they're on here or not, please reach out to your liaison. Our team will look into it and let you know, like, hey, we looked at everything and we do think this is actually maybe an issue on, not an issue on the HDX's end, but perhaps an issue with your vendor code, or is accurate and maybe something that needs to be updated in your HMIS. Or we could look into it and realize that it's another flag calculation issue that we need to update. So always reach out about those. You will notice here, I said you can still get a red banner. This will stay up just because it can always happen. And so it'll kind of stay up here always. That's different than the red banner bug, not something that you have to really worry about, but that's why it's in the two places. And then these two flags, what's important to note about these two flags is that these are issues in flag calculations that were determined with code that your vendors need to fix on their end, and is not something that we can fix on the HDX 2.0 end. So if you are getting flag 461 or 1338, then you should follow up with your vendor to see if they have made these updates on your end. And once they make the updates, then you will need to kind of rerun your report in your HMIS, re-export, re-upload, etc. And we're leaving them up here because they're vendor-wide. It's not a specific vendor. It's like a code issue that that all vendors will need to update. So we're leaving them up here until all vendors have made those updates. But it's my understanding that some vendors have made updates to either one of these flags. So you'll want to follow up with your specific vendor, and there are people, talking with vendors and making sure that they are like getting information about these updates as well. But your liaison and review team won't necessarily know where your vendor is at in making and pushing those updates. So that's kind of where, yeah.
I'm sorry, I do want to speak a little bit more on flag 1338. So I do know that there were some questions in the chat specifically about 1338, and with the specific scenario of there was a project that was not participating in HMIS and now it is, and there are some enrollments that are backdated for, clients who were active as of the switch, right? So I do want to say that even with the fix that your vendor may put in with this flag, it is likely that you will still get this flag in some scenarios, including that specific scenario. So I just want to put that out there and also let folks know that at the moment for the specific scenario that I just described and that you are asking about in the chat, we're still taking a look at that. We want to see what the fix is that the vendors put through, what impact that has on this flag before making any further decisions or updates to this flag in particular. I'm sure that folks already know, since you're asking, there is limited, well, there's none. There's no guidance in the HMIS data standards about the specific, backdated enrollments for non-participating agencies. So it's a little bit of a gray area right now, and I do recognize that is a little tricky for communities. So I just wanted to kind of put that PSA out there to kind of hold tight. And like Kiera said, please do reach out to your vendor if you have questions about timelines of when that push may be going through on their end, and then we'll see what impact that has on this particular flag for your communities, and then we'll work forward from there.
Thanks, Victoria, and feel free for anyone else to jump off and jump in on my team to add more context. You will note that there is some language for 1338 related to what Victoria said, and I know it's not the best feeling that there will probably be more updates to that flag, but like Victoria said, we want to kind of see where things are at once vendors make it. So if you do get it after your vendor tells you that they've made the updates and you've re-uploaded and done all that, you are welcome to continue to reach out to your review team and let them know, or ask any questions, or let them know about your specific situations, and just know that there will likely be more follow-up from us on what happens with that flag specifically. So multi stages, and I think for those of you that maybe, if you get to, I would say in the meantime, for both of these flags, please work on all of your other flags that you're getting. Like I said, we are in a situation in which we believe that there shouldn't be any other flag, or there's no other flag calculation issues, except for a couple that we're looking into right now that have very low impact, that should be wrong, or that are wrong. So you can feel like, go forth and look at your other flags with your vendor that are vendor-related flags, as well as the COC-related flags that you can start working through that are not related to these two flags. And if you do note any other issues, let us know. But otherwise, we think that you can feel, if you've re-uploaded since Thursday at 6:27 Eastern time, you can feel pretty confident that what you have there, if you have no red banner, are the flags that you should be working through. I am going to stop sharing and talk just briefly about warning flags and timelines specifically. So we are here on December 11th, and you'll notice that there is our second interim benchmark on the 15th. So reminder, interim benchmarks are guidelines for you to stay on track. They are not mandated, nothing happens. We will probably reach out to you if, you know, just to check on folks that don't have, we have and will be reaching out to folks that don't have successful uploads. We know that sometimes for some COCs that has been impacted by vendor things that you're working through, and you shouldn't feel like anything bad will happen to you if you are communicating with your vendor and there are just things outside of your control that have prevented you from getting a successful upload. It's really helpful for us to know that you're working on things, to reach out to your regional inbox and let us know what's going on. But it's okay if you haven't had a successful upload yet because of vendor-related issues or other things. The next interim benchmark this Friday is about having warning notes in the system. There is a lot more information about this in the LSA submission guide on what we're expecting for these uploads, so I would reference you there for more information. But just wanted to let you know, some people have submitted notes for review on your warnings. So as a reminder, you can't submit notes for errors. If you have any questions about an error or you know, want to think that something shouldn't be an error, have any kind of questions or anything, you can communicate via the inboxes. You can also ask questions about warning flags via the inboxes, but you can also put notes in for warnings. So we aim to review warning notes within 2 business days. That becomes very difficult for our review teams at high traffic moments where lots of people are submitting their notes, or if you are submitting a lot of notes. So we are recommending that people submit notes on warnings by this Friday, the 15th, if you want responses before the holiday break period that we have from the 25th of December through the 1st of January. We will definitely get back notes by the Friday the 22nd if you submit them by Friday the 15th. If you submit them next week, we will try to get through and prioritize as they come in as fast as we can, but the closer we get to that Friday, the less likely it might be for our staff to get them before they are out on vacation or on that holiday break period. So we also want to remind you that warning notes, you do not have to have a note for all of your warnings in order to submit. And once you submit for review, you get as many submit for reviews as needed. So it doesn't have to be the most final perfect data set when you submit for review, and it doesn't have to be all your warning notes. So even if you are working on some, but you have notes for some, you can submit those. We often need to ask for more information, and so we want people to have time and not submit right before the final deadline of January 17th. In case we need more information to know how to resolve your flag, we want to be able to have a couple back and forth if we need it. To that extent, if you provide, Melissa and Victoria, I think, are going to speak to this a little bit more. If you provide very specific detailed notes on your warnings the first time around, we will hopefully not need more information. We might say, well, that's, you know, we might have more follow-up questions because we don't think the detailed note addresses the situation of the flag at hand. But to the extent that, you know, sometimes people just say, nope, this is good, and we need more than this is good. We need to know why the data accurately affects your community. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to say 2 things before I pass it over to Victoria and Melissa to talk more about that. there are resource links. As I mentioned, these resource links are already posted in our LSA office hours #1. And then we have 2 more office hours that there's a registration link that Juliana will re-put in the chat, where you can register for the remaining 2 office hours we have. That will the next 2 will be kind of like this. We'll do updates on where things are at, and then we'll just spend time answering questions. So with that, I will pass it to you, Victoria.
Thanks. So I did want to speak to Katrina's question really quick about flag 969. Multiple flags for stating that there are no active clients during the reporting period, but it does seem like there are clients enrolled in the project. This can depend on the project type. So one thing to check, is this a permanent supportive housing project or a rapid rehousing project? You may want to see if the clients have move-in dates within the reporting period. And if there's not any move-in dates within the reporting period, that might be why you are seeing the flag. If that is an accurate representation of the data, then that's just a note, right, that you would leave your liaison just explaining that situation. If it looks like move-in dates are not the issue, or if it's a completely different project type, emergency shelter, for example, and you see that there are in fact enrollments in the project, but you're still getting this flag, that might point to something different. So I would reach out to your liaison in that kind of situation to see if we can do a little bit more deeper digging into that. So with that said, I do want to get to some kind of broad and general topics. Every year there are specific types of flags that come up more than others, and I would say inventory is probably the biggest chunk of flags that COCs end up getting. So the next few slides here are just kind of reminders for folks about inventory in general for HMIS, but also like specific things to keep in mind when you're dealing with like the HIC and LSA inventory comparison flags. So first off, projects that are not participating in HMIS, they still need to have inventory associated with them in HMIS. That's a question that comes up a lot. We'll get kind of notes from COCs that say, the discrepancy is because, projects X, Y, and Z aren't using HMIS, and so we don't have any data for them. But the HMIS data standards, the expectation there is that projects, whether they're participating or not, will be in your HMIS, right? And so obviously we do not expect non-participating projects to have client level data, but the project level data, such as inventory, that should be in there. Projects without a set number of beds or units, they will need to have their inventory estimated. And the HMIS data standards, again, has a few different types of methodologies that COCs can use to get to that estimation. I think, it comes up pretty often that household types do not align very nicely in real life with the inventory that a project has. So like one of the methodologies to estimate the bed type there is to just like use the average utilization for that household type that you're seeing in HMIS for the reporting period, and then kind of use that as your inventory breakdown. So that's just, kind of an extra step that COCs and HMIS admins need to take in order to input inventory accurately in HMIS. Also a reminder that rapid rehousing inventory is collected differently on the HIC than it is in HMIS. So if you're familiar with the housing inventory count, that's the HIC, beds for rapid rehousing are only counted if there is a person in that bed. Whereas in HMIS, it is, again, going back to that kind of estimation methodology, on average, on any given night, how many people can this rapid rehousing project serve, which is very different than what is being asked on the HIC. So that is something to keep in mind. There is going to be that kind of discrepancy. Also, this is new, this last one. So rapid rehousing services only projects should not have inventory in HMIS. And I believe that will throw up an error if you try and submit your LSA file with inventory for a rapid rehousing services only type project. So that is new this year. And that's just something I wanted to point out to folks. All right. More things to remember. Yes, there's more, unfortunately, for LSA and inventory. I see this question pop up a lot about dedicated beds. So when we talk about dedicated beds, we're talking about beds that strictly align with the definition in the LSA, the HMIS data standards. It means that that bed must be filled by a person in that specific subpopulation category or a household member, unless there's no one from that subpopulation who qualifies for the program. So for example, you might have a project that has, let's say, 10 beds total, and they tell you 2 of them are dedicated to youth. And so that's what you put in your HMIS inventory. It might be, though, that the project said that 2 beds were dedicated to youth because they happened to be serving 2 youth at that time. Or a lot of projects will think, and rightly so, because our project can serve youth, or because our project has the capacity to serve veterans or the chronically homeless, we're going to say that we have beds dedicated to that. But there's like a very strict and specific definition about dedicated beds. So if the beds seem to be more flexible, if they can be more flexibly used, then we would not consider that a dedicated bed. So that is something that you might get some follow-up questions about from your liaison about dedicated bed inventory if it seems like the beds may have been counted as dedicated if it looks like maybe it was reported as dedicated because the project happened to serve that subpopulation, as opposed to like strictly setting aside those beds just for that subpopulation. Also, if a project has beds for a household type that was never served during the reporting period, we are going to encourage you to update inventory. Again, this kind of goes back to that estimation methodology that we talked about on the previous slide. I think that it could be common, or you might have the experience of providers maybe pushing back when you suggest updating inventory. At least in my experience, some providers might feel like if they don't have inventory for adult child households, or they don't have inventory for child only households, it might seem that it's reflected that they can't serve that household type. But that's not really what we're trying to get at with inventory. In this sense, we're really trying to get at, on the ground, what was the real life household type utilization for that project. So just because a project does not have a specific household type associated with it, inventory wise, we don't take that to mean that that project does not serve that household type. It's just, they may not have happened to serve that household type during the reporting period for any number of given reasons. But that's something that comes up very often, and I just kind of wanted to I guess point out, or maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Allay fears, and maybe that's even too graphic of a phrase. But just kind of, just because we don't see it there doesn't mean that we think that the project can't or won't serve that household type. That's not really what we take that to mean. All right, and then specifically for HIC and LSA inventory comparison flags. So these come up a lot. They are probably the most common flags that I see every year in the LSA. These flags count beds that are available on a specific date, just one point in time, and that is your COC's point in time count, the PIT count. And so it is going to reference your COC's point in time It's going to pull the beds from that report. And then it's going to look at all of the inventory that you have in your inventory file. And it's going to see how many of those beds are available on that date, on that specific date. And so that's why you will often get or see notes on that flag from liaisons trying to get those numbers to align or to ask you which one is the correct one. Is it that the HIC number is the most reflective of the beds that were available on the night of the point in time count, or is your LSA the most accurate number of beds that were available on the night of your point in time? And if the answer is the HIC, then we'll want you to make updates as needed in your HMIS to make those numbers at least within throwing distance, if not the same, right? Because if you reported that you had 50 beds for emergency shelter available on January 26th or the night of January 26th on your HIC, then we would expect to also see 50 beds available on January 26th in your HMIS. Also, the beds only count non-domestic, the flags only count non-domestic violence beds. So if you have organizations marked as domestic violence providers in HMIS, that inventory is going to be excluded. Any projects that are marked with a target population of DV survivors of domestic violence, they will also have their inventory excluded. So even if the organization is not a DV org, if the project is marked as a DV targeting project, their inventory will not count in those HIC comparison flags, which is something to keep in mind. I don't have it listed on the slide here, but again, there is a very specific definition for target populations, just like what we saw with dedicated beds. In the data standards, the definition of a DV target population project is that 75% of the folks that are enrolled in that project are DV survivors of, DV survivors. So if the project does not meet that definition, that's probably something to consider changing. That is all that I have in terms of inventory or things to keep in mind about inventory. So I will hand it off to Melissa.
Thanks, Victoria. I'm going to go through an example inventory related issue that comes up a lot on low utilization. Before I do that, I just want to respond to a related question on related to how to represent inventory. So there was a question on any advice on how to report inventory for a project that is closed. In HMIS, the project is not operating anymore, but the project reported inventory in the HIC after their closing date. So this is related to what Victoria was talking about with the HIC and how inventory on the HIC might not always match what is in your LSA for that one night. However, in terms of what you should enter in your HMIS, and that's what will be reported in your LSA, you should enter the actual inventory start and end dates, and as well as the project's operating start and end dates. So accurately reflecting your HMIS when the project was open and when those beds were actually available. So that does mean that you may have a situation, and this happens a lot, where you're going to get another warning flag, or you're going to get a warning flag telling you that there is a discrepancy between your HIC and what is in your LSA. And so what you'll do then is just explain in your note on the warning flag, explain the situation that the project, there was a project that reported inventory after they closed, so on the HIC, so that was incorrect, and that the data reported in your LSA is correct. So that's how you should handle it. But always enter accurate data in your HMIS, and we want the most accurate data, even if that means that you're going to have discrepancies between what was on your HIC for whatever reason. In this situation, the project reported inaccurately. You could have situations where you realize later that some of the data reported in your HIC was incorrect. You know, the HIC is closed. We're not updating that now, so and it happens. So just explaining your note, which one is correct, because that, you know, that's really what we're trying to get at through this process is accurate data, and we want to see detailed notes so we can know what data is correct and what accurately represents your community. So then also on inventory, but this time about flags around low utilization. So I've seen this year and we saw last year, and I think it comes up every year, warning flags around low utilization. So meaning that it looks like, for example, and I don't know off the top of my head the actual cutoff of what's considered low utilization, but let's say it looks like you have a project or a series of projects that have only about 25% of the beds on average are filled on a given night in a year. So those flags and those numbers are, I think, approximate. They're around 1,001 to 1,024-ish. There might be a few more that I missed there. But those are flags around low utilization. And you might see a lot of different flags about low utilization because we look at by household type, look at by project type. We look at different projects. So you might open up your LSA flags and see a long list of them, and you don't know what to do with them. So the first thing you should do, well, definitely check the Weebly to see if there's a known issue. Right now, there are none that I know of off the top of my head, and I'm not staring at the Weebly right now, but you should check the Weebly first, make sure there are no known issues. And so there are no known issues. So the next step is if you go to the Common Flags Library, which I think I'm hoping someone put the link in the chat. If not, I'll do it after I'm done, or maybe one of the other folks can do it. So you'll go to that Common Flags Library, which is an Excel document, and you can search for that flag. And once you search for the flag number, you'll see this whole series of low utilization flags have a very similar descriptions and similar plain language descriptions, as well as possible causes. So it'll be possible causes here are things like your bed inventory records may need to be closed out. Not all data for the household type may have been entered, so that means so you could have an issue on the actual bed inventory side. You could have an issue on the actual people and the household data side. It could be that this is accurate. These are warnings, not errors. So warnings are things that are possible. It's also possible that some of the projects of whatever project type the flag is flagging ended around the time the report period began, or the projects began around the same time the report period ended, meaning the project wasn't open for much of the year. So sometimes there are few client enrollments that can affect the utilization percentage as well. So hopefully you open up the Common Flags Library and you see this, you're like, oh, I know what the problem is. But maybe you don't. Maybe you're still a little confused. You think your data is correct in HMIS. You're not sure what you're supposed to actually change. The next thing to do would be to go to that LSA Guidance on Common Data Quality Issues doc. Often we just call it the Common Issues doc. We'll also put a link to that in the chat if we haven't already. And you can you can search that by kind of more of a topic section. It's sort of organized more around the types of data elements in HMIS. I think Victoria talked about the Common Issues doc in the last office hours session, so I'm not going to go through that too much. But if you go to pages 8 to 12, which is the inventory section, that will kind of summarize what's in the HMIS data standards around guidance around setting up inventory correctly in your HMIS. So especially if you have a lot of flags or very similar flags, that sort of indicates that there may be some underlying issues. Maybe you just had a different understanding of how inventory was supposed to be entered. Maybe the projects are entering some data incorrectly. But if you go there and review that section of the common issues, you'll find information around what inventory start and end dates should be. So those are really the dates that should document when the beds were actually available for occupancy. So Victoria kind of touched on this before. It's not, it should reflect when they were available. So someone could live in that bed or could live in that unit. Another thing to check if you're getting low utilization flags, because those flags are by household type, sometimes it looks like you have very low utilization for, let's say, adults with children households, and that's because your product actually doesn't have that. In reality, it isn't really serving that many adults with children. So you have too many beds in HMIS for adults with children that don't actually reflect how the project is being used. So in that case, it may not be that you need new start and end dates or just start and end dates for inventory, but that you need to document in HMIS that those beds are for a different household type, and that could correct your utilization issues. There are also issues around utilization related to dedicated bed types. So you also want to make sure that information is correct. And then you might realize after you review all this, well, everything in the HMIS does accurately reflect what was available. All the clients and all the households start and end dates were correct. In reality, these projects, or could be just one project, was underutilized that year. And if that is the case, that means that this data does accurately represent your COC. It accurately represents your community. So let's say you had an emergency shelter and all the beds in it were for youth only. You could only put youth in those beds. But this year there were fewer youth in your community who needed shelter because you had a higher availability of other resources. Maybe you had more rapid rehousing for youth. So those beds just weren't used as much. If that is the case, you will leave a note in your note. And again, please leave a detailed note explaining the situation. What we're looking for in things like these low utilization flags, it's not just saying this data is accurate. We would like a little more information. So whatever you can provide is great. And once we see that, we'll be able to say, okay, this makes sense. This data accurately represents your community, and then your note will be sufficient. So that's just one example of a flag that comes up a lot, or flags, because it is more than one flag. Yeah, so those are the keys. Just use those documents, use those resources, leave very detailed notes if the data is accurate, and of course, always reach out to your liaison as well if you have any questions. I'm going to pass it back, I think, to Kiera.
Yeah, so we are going to go into some questions right now. So the first question is, can you talk about handling rapid rehousing projects that started after the pit count, and how are we supposed to handle the number of beds when setting up the inventory? For example, a project start date of July 2023.
Yeah, so I can talk about this a little bit. So for rapid rehousing, there is usually not a set number of beds or units. It might be voucher based, and so you might have like the number of vouchers available, but that doesn't necessarily tell you the number of beds. You will want to work with the project and get a sense of how many folks do they anticipate serving. You'll see in the HMIS data standards that there is a line, there's a guidance in there that says the number of beds is not necessarily the same number that is on the grant application for the project. So you'll just, specifically for rapid rehousing, you'll want to really talk with the provider to get a sense of, on average, how many people do they think they can serve on a given night. You can also go back and use let's say you have a project start date of July 2023. From July 2023 to the end of the report period, how many people were served on average? And using that kind of utilization to direct you on like the household type breakout. So there is that. There's also more for inventory specifically. So Kayla has a question about if you update inventory, wouldn't that cause discrepancies with the compare with HIC, meaning those are expected to match according to the flag description? Can you talk through this some? Yes. So when we ask, and Caleb, please do correct me if I'm wrong, and you can put this in the chat, but I am assuming that you mean when we ask folks to update the inventory as it relates to like household type, there will likely be cases where more flags pop up because of that. What I would personally expect if I was in the HMIS admin seat, like I was for several years at the Texas Bar and State, I would put in the note that it is the LSA inventory that is the most reflective of the community as opposed to the HIC. And for the HIC comparison pieces though, I do want again to stress that it is just a single point in time. And so if on the HIC you reported that there were 10 beds available, or the provider reported that there were 10 beds available for adult child households, and then they never served adult child households. I mean, I feel like that's something that just kind of comes up. It's kind of unfortunate, but that's just kind of like the messiness of data, right? And so when we look at this data, after it's been collected and it's cleaned, what we really want to know is what was the most accurate number. I'm trying to think if there is anything else specific to that. And if there's anyone else on the team that wants to jump in and speak a little bit more about that. I mean, it's not perfect by any means. But yeah, I think like the overall expectation is that we're really trying to get at what is the most accurate number.
Thanks, Victoria. We are feverishly discussing and looking at the questions that have come in and sending some answers out via the chat. And so Melissa, did you want to answer that shelter question verbally or via the chat?
Yeah.
Or are you still working on it? Okay.
I was trying to find it in our list of questions. Sure. Someone asked, and I think I've seen a few questions like this last year that may have come up, and we've heard this through a couple of other venues as well, around shelters that are only open in the winter on nights when the temps go below a certain threshold. So a little different than seasonal, or at least the way seasonal is described in the data standards, where there are sort of set or more or less set start and end dates. So for example, a seasonal shelter might be open between, depending on where you are, of course, between like December and March or something, right? Regardless of what the actual temperature is. However, there are a lot of communities that have these shelters that only open once the temps drop below whatever the threshold is. How should that be logged in HMIS? Because put it in as seasonal, it shows it's having very low utilization rates since it's empty most nights. So the way these shelters are really operating, even though, you know, temperatures kind of make it sound like it's actually seasonal, right? They're following a season, but it's really operating more like an overflow shelter because they are only open as needed, right? So in that case, we have recommended in the past, and I would recommend now, to set those up as overflow beds. When you're setting them up as overflow beds, and this is the guidance we've given before, more proactively, you would put in the number of beds you anticipate to be available, and then retroactively, you can update based on the average number that you or the shelter used over the course of the winter. So, and once they're no longer offered, you will also need to enter an inventory end date for those records. So, you know, you could still wind up, depending on how you do it, with maybe some utilization flags, but it definitely isn't really operating like a seasonal shelter. It's really operating more like an overflow shelter. And you will put in inventory just based on that average utilization across a period of time.
So I'm recognizing that we have 4 minutes left, and we have a number of questions that we haven't had a chance to get to. What I will tell everyone, I think we have one more or two more maybe. So anyone on the team, if you want to answer something verbally, let me know. We will also try and get some comments in the chat. But if your question wasn't answered, we do have it, and we will follow up individually. And it will also be posted, the Q&A will be posted when we post these to the HUD Exchange, and you know, we can follow up. I think we're getting a lot of questions on this non-participating and start dates and stuff like that. So we can follow up at the beginning of next time with anything that seems important to cover generally. Does anyone on the team want to answer anything verbally? There are a couple questions. Yeah, so I was wondering the same thing, Victoria. We've gotten a couple questions about that kind of participating in HMIS and start dates. And so we feel like those are related to the flag 1338 issue. They might be. If you don't think that they are, you can reach out to your review team. But again, a reminder that flag 1338 has some issues that need to be updated by vendors. And then after that, we will look at what COCs and how many flags are being kind of populated or triggering for 1338. And we might decide to update the flag calculation or change the error to a warning, etc. But if your vendor has already made the updates and you have re-uploaded and you are still generating flag 1338 and you have these questions, reach out to your review team and we'll work with folks individually and also give updates on any other changes we make to 1338. Changes will also, to 1338 in the future, will also always be on Weebly, so that's kind of your one-stop shop for the most up-to-date information in between meetings like this and waiting to hear back from your review teams. Okay, one final answer question. Okay, so I'm gonna take one. We had a question, does someone have to register separately again for these office hours? And the answer is yes. All of the office hours have their own registration link and you have to register for them separately. So Juliana, if you can put in the chat for the registration for all of them. An email went out last Thursday or Friday with the materials, the link to the materials for the first office hours, and it also had all the registration links for all of the other office hours as well, if you have that in your email. And that goes out to HUD Exchange listservs. Okay. We are not there. People are asking good questions. We are having internal conversations, and there are just some questions that we don't want to give you the wrong information. So we will, like I said, follow up with everyone that we haven't responded to and ask for more information if we need it, and then give back out that information to you individually, but also we can follow up at the beginning of next office hours with some of those answers. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you next week as well.